So welcome everyone to this Obelisk Support Move the Needle webinar, Step Right In, Getting Started as a Legal Consultant. Now, recent surveys have revealed that half of corporate lawyers say they plan to leave their current role within 2 years, and that over a third of lawyers could be working on some kind of law firm platform model in the next 5 years. So today we thought we'd explore some of the opportunities that legal consulting has to offer with Obelisk and the points to consider to find out whether it's the right choice for you and the next steps to take. I'm Lucinda Acland, Learning and Development Partner at Obelisk Support, the UK's leading flexible legal services provider. And I'm joined by two of our consultants, Golna Asari and Mark Hanlon, who have kindly agreed to share their experience and help answer any questions you have about working as a consultant with us, together with Jane Leader, Obelisk's recruitment manager. So please feel free to put any questions in the Q&A area as we go along. I'll have a look at that during the webinar, and we'll also have a session at the end for any other questions you might think of. So the structure today will be looking first about the experiences of working as a consultant, the types of roles available, impact on a lawyer's career life cycle, and then the aspects to consider when contemplating the change from being employed to working as a freelancer. So you can decide whether legal consulting is going to be a good option for you. Then, drawing on Obelisk's 11 years of experience, we'll discuss our approach to helping consultants thrive and how we can be in a position to uniquely support you to get the best out of your career throughout these different stages of your life. Now, before we look under the bonnet, Jane, as Obelisk recruitment manager since 2014, no less, can you give us a brief overview of where you see the opportunities in the legal consultancy market?
Thanks, Lucinda. I think before we sort of start in that, I think it's always useful to go back and look back. So when I joined Obelisk, as you said, in 2014, there were really only probably a very small handful of providers and what I thought was still quite a traditional marketplace. I think clients were pretty skeptical of contract lawyers and their reasons for wanting to work that way. And I think probably lawyers were too. I suspect they were equally hesitant to leave what felt like the safety of a permanent job, or they were probably just unaware of what the other options were for them at the time. But fast forward to this year, and particularly where we've been over the last few years, you know, the market now is busy and pretty buoyant. And I think we're at a time where there's a perfect storm of issues that's created quite a really good demand for contract lawyers at the moment. And actually the pandemic has really created probably a much greater awareness of flexible working. And that's not just remote working, but how you can work more flexibly. And I think it's probably things like spikes in workload. There's been a lot of sickness. Law firms probably aren't seconding out their associates quite so readily anymore. There's been some tax changes for self-employed contractors, and I suspect probably fewer lawyers from other jurisdictions either coming into the UK or quite a few leaving as well. So there's been a lot of things happening in that marketplace. But I think, you know, last year was very busy, and that shift has really continued. And I think, well, personally, I think it's a great time to be part of this interim market. And a lot of our clients have always had a pretty good sense of that there's this growing community of lawyers out there wanting to work in different ways. And I think also for our lawyers, our consultants, they want to take a bit of control back. They still want to get good work and earn a good living, but without losing the living part and probably balancing all of those things out. So we're seeing, you know, a really good steady workflow, and that's continued from last year. So I think if you're in a permanent role at the moment, or you're in a place where your employer, you know, can't find ways of keeping you motivated, then there are definitely other options out there that you can do that yourself.
Thanks, Jane. So now we're going to turn to the consultant side of things, and I'd like to introduce Golna Asari and Mark Hallen, and ask them a bit more about their experience in legal careers. So Golna, you've had a very experienced international practice. Can you tell us a bit more about your background, please?
Yes, of course. I'm originally a French jurist. I left France around 20 years ago, and I did have quite an international career, working abroad most of my career for multinational companies. So I have experience in Asia, where I was for a few years, the Middle East, Africa, and a couple of countries in Europe. I worked mostly in commercial, so I was in legal management, regional positions, but also in compliance. So my experience, I mean, looking at big projects I could have worked on would be big infrastructure tenders in railway or energy industry. So offshore platform, power plants, these sort of projects, trains, building metros. And also on the compliance side, I had an international investigation and SFO prosecution of a major French company that followed here. And other projects would be ISO 37001 audits, sanctions, due diligence, know your customer sort of, works. So yes, quite a few commercial and compliance work.
Thank you. Well, clients and us too are very lucky to have someone like you with that wealth of experience. And Mark, can you tell us a bit about your career path so far?
Yes, mine was fairly conventional in some respects. I trained at Beechcroft Stanleys in London as it was then in the late 90s. I spent a few years in private practice, but it was astonishingly choppy. It was very, very unstable. And then in 2000, I went in-house as an in-house counsel at Balfour Beatty, and I was there for 15 years. Which is quite a long time for anybody to be in one job. I specialised in PFI projects, and then Balfour Beatty, its investment division, got into serious trouble, so I went back into private practice and did the same role at a national firm that then got into trouble. And I found myself at 2018 in a situation where I was doing something called PFI, which the government was no longer doing. So the number of career opportunities were astonishingly limited. And I decided to go freelancing because I realized I could rebrand myself as a commercial lawyer. And I think that is obviously very important in terms of people who are wanting to do this, in terms of how you can rebrand yourself. It's in some senses effectively retrain, but take a lot of skills that you've got to rebrand yourself. So I've done, to give an indication of that, with Obelisk, I've worked in a bank. I've worked on with an oil company doing offshore floating oil platforms. In other freelance roles, I worked at the Treasury for a year doing Brexit. So it gives you an idea of the ability to go from one thing and really, really expand your horizons if you go freelancing.
Thank you, and likewise, a great mix of experience and a sort of potted history of the legal services sector over a few years. It's very interesting to have that perspective, and also you emphasize the capacity to gain skills during freelance work, which is certainly something we'll be coming back to. Now, turning to the experience of working through Obelisk, typically our consultants will work individually on assignments, but also sometimes as part of a team for a particular project for clients. And as well as offering good quality roles with great clients, we do seek to put our human first value into practice by seeking to understand the background and skills of each consultant when we match them for the roles. And we offer also support and resources in terms of a designated consultant community manager, discounted CPD courses, webinars, and access to LexisNexis when you're in role. We have created an active community for our consultants with weekly updates and events, which are now coming back on in person as well as online, to provide consultants with a supportive network. Can I ask you, Mark and Golna, to describe your experience of working with Obelisks so far, and perhaps any of the support resources that you've been offered, your roles, and what your thoughts have been about that? Golna, can I ask you?
My experience has been quite positive. I learned about Obelisk from one of the consultants actually that we crossed paths working for the same client. We was my very first client when I started freelancing. And so she told me about, what you guys were doing, and that's how I got quite interested and I reached out. I have to say Obelisk is the only firm I'm working with. I know there are quite a few out there. I was approached by others, and I didn't really like maybe the atmosphere. I find Obelix more personal. The onboarding was very efficient. All the questions that I had were answered. It was because it's a scary experience to go by yourself. You don't really know, and I think Obelix gave me that support to start that I didn't necessarily feel from other firms that reach out and then they may be there and not be there, disappear, come back 6 months later. Sometimes they're more interested in knowing your existing clients, who you can bring to them, rather than knowing what you can, how you can work together. So yes, I mean, overall, and I find the team quite accessible. I mean, I have contacts that I can just phone if I have a question. And in this point, it makes you feel more as part of a team than just by yourself, while still having the freedom of organizing your hours and managing how much you actually want to get involved or not.
Well, that's great to hear. Mark, how about you?
I would second a lot of that. Obviously when you do freelancing, you're not exclusive to one organization, so you've got to get the work in. So sometimes you've got to you may be part of other platforms. I was part of 2 large ones since 2018, and although I get occasional emails from them and lots of positive interviews and positive noises, I've not had a single referral from either of them. Obelisk is absolutely fantastic. One of the things that you did was you understood my line of work, which was actually quite niche and quite narrow. So the things that you put forward to me reflected my skill set, as opposed to sort of just being a very, very small cog in a very large wheel in some of the I think some of the other agencies where they don't really understand what you do. The other thing which I found astonishingly helpful was the weekly emails that you send through, because I was able to look at roles and say, I'm suitable for that. And then just drop a line through and say, I want to go for that because I think I'm really suitable. I never had that with I did suggest to the other platforms, why don't you do that? Because I've got a greater knowledge of my skill set than possibly you do. So I can give a clearer indication of what I'm right for. So those weekly emails were absolutely invaluable, saying what opportunities there were. And yes, I had absolutely tremendous help just with the whole onboarding process. A lot of coordination between you, me, and the ultimate client very early on in a job to make sure that me and the client were working well together. Also, a lot of IT support, and also just help with the admin side of it now because of IR35, where in many cases you've got to be an employee of a company. So it was seamless support right the way through, but most fundamentally an understanding of what I'm good at and the ability for me to come back to you and say, aha, there's something which you've just put up this week. I think I'm really good for that.
I think that's really important to know, that it's less a sort of transactional relationship and more of a sort of coordinated dialogue where, and like in any relationship, the more that you interact with each person and each party, you get to know each other better and what the strengths are and where the fit will be best. Now, I think, Mark, you've now made a decision, having been doing some freelance work, to perhaps look at moving back into a permanent role. And this is quite an interesting aspect. Can you tell us a bit about that?
It is. It's no problem with consulting. It's simply that in terms of consulting, I see it as a very, very long-term career option. But there are occasions when strategically a role you might get approached to do a role, which was the case here. I was contacted by a law firm to do a permanent role because what they were offering was incredibly niche in terms of what my skill set is. But most importantly, it would give me that sort of greater level of ability. I just thought, well, this is actually really going to develop me as a lawyer and develop me in my area. this, of course, permanent roles last for as long as you want a permanent role to last for. And so you can come out of that permanent role later on, go back to consulting, but you're probably a better lawyer having done that. And there's more that you can offer with your skill set. And that is, I think, a very important point to make of just how flexible this is. I'm sort of 49 at the moment. I could do what I'm doing for another couple of years, but then happily go back to consulting for another 15 years of my career. But what I'm doing now, I think, is very, very good for my long-term development. And so that's another great. It's another great sort of advert for Obelisk, simply because you don't look on someone negatively for having done that. You actually sort of see it as a positive, and you maintain the relationship, recognizing, well, this bit of career development they're doing at the moment could be fantastic down the line for all of us, which just shows how sort of liberal the view is, which you don't get that sort of very liberal understanding view, I think, in many private practice firms. They've got very, very narrow conservative mindsets.
I think their business model, because it's been so traditional on the sort of pyramidal partnership, that's lent itself to lots of quite restrictive management decisions. But your experience of returning to a permanent role at the moment, but then having a perspective of looking into the future is really interesting. And it's a choice that we have known several Obelisk consultants take after they've spent some time working with us. And indeed, we've had people go back into permanent employment, become clients who then instruct us. So it's a very nice, flexible life cycle. We obviously are supportive of consultants who are exploring all of the work options available to them, and understand very much that it's really critical that you're able to take control over careers, and that this may change over different points in your life, moving, through employed to freelance, full-time, part-time, and vice versa. Jane, I understand that this is an area that sometimes lawyers considering to make the leap into consultancy can express some concerns about the impact on this. Can you tell us about some of those conversations that you've had over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to people, for a long time now, but, and all at different levels. So, people at very experienced levels, very senior levels, through to junior lawyers and paralegals. And I think, they're all coming to me for different reasons. And I think, mostly by choice, but some find themselves in a position of redundancy, or they're coming back after a career break, or even just a break from practicing law, or various other reasons, I guess, that's creating this need to maybe move out of a permanent job or find something that's more flexible, that can be done on a contract basis. So, all of those things, I think we can work around quite well. But I think, the idea of this career ladder, or like maybe a single career ladder, is pretty outdated. Maybe there's more of a career track that you can follow, that might lead you down different paths to get to where you want to be. And I think legal consulting definitely offers that alternative route to progression. Someone described it to me last week as an escape route for them. They just wanted out of what they were doing, and they were just looking for what other opportunities there were. So it shouldn't lead, I think, and they're probably more a historical thing, that contracting was seen as a bit of a dead end. But actually, what from our experience, and from listening to Gulnar and Mark, it can be very much been enriching experience for a lot of them, particularly to their careers. It can expand the type of work, great cross-sector experience, and exposure to different people and organisations. And as Mark said, it can be a great stepping stone, or short-term gain, or it can be, for longer-term fulfilment. Everyone is very different in that. And I think once you're in contracting, or maybe some of the things that you don't always think about, I hear this through the people I interview at Obelisk, things like the politics and the bureaucracy that disappears. We don't personally ask for any targets or any sort of business development requirements or minimum working commitment. A lot of our consultants do bring their clients with them, and that's fine. If they want to work through us that way, there's definitely the opportunity to do that, but there's certainly no need to do that. And Lucinda, as you said, it can be a bit of a carousel where consultants become clients and vice versa. You know, and the range of role profiles now is so vast that I often think there's probably something for everyone at some point.
Yeah, thank you. So clearly there are people, it's a natural thing if you're employed to have some sort of hesitancies about this, and not only short term but longer term. Do you think can you think back to when you started, Mark and Gona, did you have any initial concerns about this?
I think that there was just two. So one is that you go from a situation in which you get up and go to work every day, and you know there's going to be a certain level of work in all probability. And when you're in consulting, you know your sort of first day of being out of the regular job and being a consultant is, well, okay, right. There's what do I do? There's no, you know, if you haven't sort of got a role immediately. It's that some of the biggest concerns can simply be, well, when is the role going to come? And you have to sort of manage your concerns and sort of anxiety in that regard and think, look, something will come through. But you have to get yourself in the mindset of just, look, if there's nothing immediately on the horizon, just relax. Because if you've decided to work flexibly and have that downtime between roles, you're going to go through that, but you might as well enjoy it if that's the choice that you have made. Something always comes up, has been my experience of doing this. And I remember I was sat there one Wednesday thinking, you know, scratching my head thinking, there's nothing on the horizon. And then Thursday I had a phone call. Friday I was in an interview. And then by Friday afternoon, I got an absolutely fantastic roll through from SBM. So it can change astonishingly quickly, where you might not have anything on your plate, and then all of a sudden you've landed an absolutely plum roll, and it's come through in the space of about 2 days. It was the same with another. It was just, that's happened twice actually, where it's just simply been a phone call. Can you do an interview in, you know, X number of hours? You go, you do the interview, you come off the interview, and then with a couple of hours, yes, you've got the role. So I would say just get yourself comfortable with the decision that you have made, and don't have too much anxiety if you're not in a role at that particular point. Enjoy your time out of that if you've made that decision, but also do be sensible and just put a decent amount of money in the bank just to sort of cover those times when you're not in a role. But one of the things I find is a lot of the roles pay so well that you can actually bank the money and then say, well, actually, I've now got enough to have a month or two's downtime. And that's how the industry works. I would say two things: just make sure you've got a decent financial buffer. But secondly, when you're having downtime, enjoy it and don't be anxious about it.
Yes, I mean, I fully agree with Mark. I think it was the same for me. The money, definitely. It's generally, I was terrified when I quit my job and decided to start freelancing. I wasn't sure. I was one of those escape routes, you know, thinking I just don't want to do this anymore. It's too much pressure. I love my job, but it was too much work and pressure. And so I had no clue what I was doing really, and it turned out to be perfect. But I agree, it's just you have to let go of a mindset completely. You have to let go of the corporation mindset, because it is about money. It is about, you know, having this every day waking up to something, this structure, but it goes beyond that, because you're sort of pampered. I mean, it reminded me, I didn't realize until I left my job how it's a bit of this parent and kid relationship that you have with your employer, and everything is taken care of for you, and you have your IT system and you have your admin system and everything you want, and holidays that are paid, and you know, everything is, you're being told how it works, and then you just follow it. And this is completely gone. When you start, you can't rely on one. I mean, I stopped very quickly. I started relying on one, you know, client and one assignment, and then you realize actually you could have several if you want. You could do, you know, this sort of work in the morning. You could just not do it, and, you know, just be part-time if you want to. You can decide the way it actually works for you. But then you also lose, you know, that support system. And I had moment, for me, the worst was the pandemic. When COVID hit, I just started this assignment with Obelisk. The week before, we were in the office with another consultant, meeting the team, all excited, you know, getting our laptop fixed and everything. And it was supposed, I think, to be a couple of days a week. And then lockdown happened and it just went quiet. And at that point, I thought, this is me packing up, going back to France. This is over. Why did I do this? It was why? But yes, I mean, it was just a time for people to realize what was happening. And within a few weeks, we started working nonstop with them. So yes, I mean, as Mark said, you never really know what can happen. You just have to let go of that whole way of thinking and working, and then whatever, be open, and the really good stuff happens.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you both talk about that sort of mental perspective and the mindset, and that's worth giving some thought to beforehand. Traditionally, as I mentioned, it's been such a inflexible way of working in the legal sector, and it's great that now it's they're seeing the benefits, even if it's been a bit sort of forced upon them. So certainly it's our experience that working as a consultant is a really valuable source of opportunities to gain experiences in different organisations, sectors, and as I say, the increasingly part of the modern lawyer's career journey. So obviously we've sung the praises of this way of working and the opportunities. We're going to take a bit of a closer look at the decision-making process and the factors to consider whether it's the right choice for you. Now, Mark, you've already spoken about having a bit of a buffer. So what was it, would you say, was the main prompts to make the shift into full-time consultancy? I know that you've both alluded to it a bit, but it would be helpful to have that sort of teased out a bit more.
Yes, I was in something called the PFI industry, which some people might know, they might not, but it was a big thing. And then all of a sudden the government said, we're not doing it any longer. And so I'd been in two roles where the businesses effectively collapsed because there was no new work coming in. So one role collapsed in 2015. I had another one. I thought, okay, fine, I'm safe. Then that collapsed for pretty much the same reasons. And so I was in a collapsing industry. And so I realized that there weren't any traditional roles that fitted my line of work. So I decided at that point that I've got to think completely differently about what kind of lawyer I am and actually what my skill set is. And actually using this skill set, I can go into a number of different things and have that variety. So it wasn't a case of just sort of trying to sort of shoehorn myself into something that I'd never done before, and then going down a completely new career path that I'd never done before. Consultancy gave me the ability to say, I've got all of these commercial skills. I can just bring those to another commercial organization that wants them. And say it was more a case of really sort of, this is what I can do, this is what I can offer, and this just gives me an awful lot of variety in terms of the different things that I can go for, as opposed to sort of being stuck in, if I had gone into a new role, just being stuck in one new role year after year after year. I just was attracted to the variety. So I ended up working, being based in London. I ended up working in a bank in Leicester and sort of just learning a little bit about banking. I worked in government, and I learned how government works, which is just absolutely invaluable. And then spent some time sort of sat in my study in Norfolk doing what I would describe as a genuine worldwide role. So I'd be on a call to the Middle East in the morning, and then I'd be on a Teams call to another client in another part of the world in the afternoon. My general counsel was an English lawyer in Monaco. Bits of the business were in Netherlands, bits of it were in China, bits of it were in Brazil, and I was just having calls with all of those different jurisdictions, which is about as varied as you can get. And so going into consultancy gave me that ability, to rebrand, and to think about what it was that I could offer as a lawyer, and just think very differently outside the box that I'd been in, but also that variety of just being able to go to different places, offer those skills, but also learn new skills as well.
Thank you. And Golna, how about you, looking back at that time?
I think for me, I moved to London 2 years before I quit my job and started freelancing. And I think I learned about consultancy when I moved here. This is not something that really, Latin Europe, it's starting. It's nowhere near where we are, and yeah, it's difficult. So anyway, when I learned about it, I thought this is just very interesting. So I think those 2 years, it was already, you know, the idea forming into my mind and thinking. And I mean, to me, it's a perfect match to my personality. And I think looking back now, somehow I was forcing my corporate career to be as if I was a consultant, because I would, you know, change every 2 years, change country, change position. So I had this need for change and new challenges and this constant, you know, curiosity that freelancing is giving you. So when I quit my job, it was more, I was coming out of a trial that was just so much, you know, so stressful, seeing individuals being prosecuted, you know, corporate employees of colleagues of mine about to go to prison. Hopefully they all were acquitted, but you know, it was very draining. So when I quit my job, at first it was more about this, I need a break. And that's when I thought this is now the time for me to take this leap of faith and go for it. And I honestly do not see myself go back to a corporate role at all.
Yeah.
I think it's just, yes, it's a perfect fit for me.
It's fascinating because it sounds like it effectively replicated your mindset of wanting, you know, having mastered one particular challenge, you then were moving, and this allows you to do so in a much more flexible way. And Mark, for you, it sounds like, you know, the external factors forced you to reevaluate, and that's worked out extremely well. Would you say, the pair of you, that it has led you to a better balance from your personal circumstances,
Oh, yes.
work changes? Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I mean, for me, absolutely. It's because, I mean, whether it's a law firm or it can depend on the corporate culture, but I find that based on my experience, there is this vision as you have to give everything you have to the company. You know, there's this accepted feeling that you should be answering your phone at any time, you should be available. You know, you can't be doing anything else during working hours than working. And now I do. And honestly, I mean, there are days we all live in the UK. You know, we know how it is. The sun is out in the afternoon, I literally cancel calls and I go out. And like, this afternoon, I am just not working. The sun is out for the first time in weeks. So this, and you don't have to justify, you know, I'm sorry, something come up, I can't work this afternoon, you know, let's catch up. And then the following day, I work 3 times more. And this is something that you would, you know, never get in a corporation. The work-life balance, I mean, to me at least, it's as long as you take time for yourself and you check in with yourself and you make sure that you are where you are, because the risk with freelancing actually is the fear of never getting any role. So you accept everything that comes up. So that's something that you need to be aware of as well. Give yourself time for break, for holidays. Sometimes, you know, maybe say no, or try to organize it in a way that you don't overwork yourself, because that is definitely a risk. You're so worried that maybe at some point there won't be work, that whatever comes, you just take it. And you realize it's been a year and you haven't had a break.
Sure. And Mark, how about you? Do you think it's given you more sort of headspace personally, or perhaps in the work? I mention that because I know that we've spoken before that as a consultant, interestingly, when you go into these organizations, they see you more as a resource, and others don't look at you as a competition. So you don't have that tension that sadly human nature brings itself to working office life.
I think that's right. I just touch on two points first. The first role I did with you was a 9-to-5 role, 3 days a week. So you just had a very long weekend.
Yeah.
But the second role I did was a full-time role, and was quite full on to start with. Just sort of getting to grips with it. So and then by the end, I was doing 3 hours a day, you know, 3-4 hours a day, just not necessarily because the workload dropped off, but just simply because I grasped it, was able to do it much more quickly, and you know, could effectively do it all in the morning and take the afternoon off. And you just don't get that kind of freedom in a regular role. It's what, once you've mastered it, once you've grasped it, once you've done it, you can take that time out. Of course, it is reflected in what you get paid, but of course that's the trade-off, that's the balance. I totally agree with your point there, that when you go into these organizations, you're new, and an awful lot of people can be quite protective towards you. and there hasn't time, yeah, and so you may be there for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever. You haven't had the time to sort of build up the political conflicts that can exist in all organizations when you're there for a prolonged period, just simply as a result of human nature. You know, we try to get along with everybody, but we can't always get along with everybody, and sometimes other people just behave in very difficult ways. You don't really get to see that side of an organization because you're new and everybody's quite nice to you and everybody is wanting to present a good impression to you as much as you want to create a good impression to them. So I found that I didn't come home every night with all that toxicity of office politics, because you just don't really, I found you didn't really get it. And so my mind was much clearer. I had a much greater sense of well-being because I just wasn't carrying all that toxic energy from the day, which is astonishingly draining. And I think the point that you've picked up right at the start about the number of people wanting to leave a standard legal career, you know, it sounded like it was nearly half of them doing corporate. An awful lot of that is probably nothing to do with the work. It's probably to do with what might be considered toxic working environments, which have just built up that toxicity over a period of time. I didn't get that, you know. You were always insulated from the office politics that were going on, and you were never seen as a threat to anybody in terms of their career progression. So nobody undermined you, which I'm sure everybody has gone through in permanent roles where they might have been there for some period of time. Much greater sense of well-being not to have to deal with that at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really important to be upfront about that elements, although it's not palatable. But as we both said, it's an unfortunate facet of human nature, and to be able to have a bigger headspace both at work and at home is very important. So I'm just thinking of recapping just at this point some of the things to think about when considering consultancy work. We suggest that you're clear on your priorities in your life now. You know, your financial requirements are obviously key, and consider your need for financial security. The element about building up a buffer, that's really useful, clear advice. Certainly the time commitments of your availability, both for perhaps immediate or wider family work and perhaps other projects that you've got. What hours are you prepared or available to work to meet these priorities? It's important to test yourself out and think about this. And certainly what work best suits your legal skills and sector experience. Can I ask you, Golnar and Mark, to think about the way that you basically physically approached making these leaps? How did you prepare? Golnar, I know you've touched on, you know, why you were doing it, and you setting yourself a shorter period of time because of your natural curiosity. Well, how did you think, how am I going to protect my worries about this and yet make the leap?
So because I can be sometimes a bit risk adverse, I thought I had it sorted out. I had a certain amount of time, so I gave myself, it was 18 months. Divided between just me taking a break, holiday, you know, traveling and just have a break. And then the rest was starting as a freelancer and taste the waters. And then I had what I call the critical phase. And that phase was, if nothing is happening, then I'm starting to consider other options, maybe back in-house, giving me enough time financially. All of it, you know, would be related to the finances to reconsider and maybe just go back in-house in case of, that would be the worst case scenario. So I had these deadlines. And I think for me, the most important part was to just let that money go and not think about it. I mean, you know, it was an investment towards myself for whatever reason. You know, it can be a house, it can be a car, a wedding. You just make the decision. And I didn't want to be, because the fear, you know, and thinking, oh my God, I'm just, you know, I'm spending money and I'm not making any, you know, progress in the freelancing. I didn't want to be in that position. So from the start, I told myself, this money is gone. Don't even think about it. This was, you know, your saving, the way that you would do with a wedding. You decide to invite 200 people to your wedding. This is the budget, and that's it. And don't think about it. Don't spend 18 months, you know, crying over it. This is your decision. And then you'll see, as you're hitting those deadlines, what happens. And I actually found my first client way before I hit even the red, you know, zone. So it all worked fine. But I think it's just a way to really the fear really and to make yourself comfortable into the decision.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. And Mark, how about you?
I agree completely with that. And the thought that just came into my head is when you're setting that money aside, you're investing in your sanity.
Exactly.
If you have come, if you really are at your sort of the end of your tether in terms of where you are at your career at the moment, and it's affecting you in all sorts of negative ways, you are investing in your sanity. So yeah, let it go, because that is a great investment. I found that there were two approaches I made, and everybody's different, but I found the rule of thumb for me was to have enough to cover my expenses for 6 months. So whether that is possible for everybody and whether everybody needs that is really a question for them. You've got to do your own budgets, but that's what I put in my head. And same experience, something came through very, very quickly before I'd got into that red zone. So that was the practical side of it. And then there is just the mindset mind of it, that this is now something I'm doing, which is completely different. And as I've tried to indicate at the start, I've sort of got a very different mindset for the rest of my career up to retirement. It's well, I might need to do this over here. Well, I might need to do this over there. Well, I can jump into that, and then I can come back to that. And it's got all of that flexibility. I wouldn't say that I'm forever on the treadmill, even as a result of going back to doing a permanent role. In a sense, I view all roles now as a kind of a freelancing role, where there'll be a beginning, there'll be a middle, and then there'll be an end, and then there'll just be a need to do something new. And that is a big mindset shift, where you can take the view that, well, I'm shifting my perception of how I see my career for over a spread of about 20 to 30 years. I'm looking at it in a completely different way, as opposed to I've got to go from miserable permanent role to miserable permanent role, and I'm always on the treadmill and I'm always exhausted. And you can say no. It's at the moment I decide I need time out and how much time I want out, then I can do that. But no one's going to think negatively about that.
No, it puts you in the driving seat, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Very empowering. Jane, how does that resonate with you in terms of some of the common issues that people ask you about as being prospective consultants?
Yeah, I really liked hearing about those approaches, because I think there is the practical element, all of that. But actually, Mark, what you were saying about this whole mindset shift, there is a lot of thinking behind it, and it's really helpful. Before I have a call with someone, that they have put a bit of time and effort into that, because I think you do really need to know, aside from all the practical issues, is really knowing what you want to do and why, and and your reasons for doing that. And I think there is still an element of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. There's always going to be risk, I think, with anything these days. And also, I mean, obviously, when you speak to me, I can talk about Obelisk and why I think it might be right for you. But outside of Obelisk, there's a whole lot of other options as well. So I think it's not only knowing what you want to do, but what's going to be the right way of doing it for you. You've got us, who we're sort of an alternative legal services provider, and you've got a whole variation of places now, through to these virtual law firm platforms. And they all work very differently, and you need to decide how you're going to fit into that, what's going to be the best approach for you. So yeah, no, they were all really, I think you've covered most of the points, both Golden and Mark, about those common issues. And I do my best to answer all of those questions. I can't definitely say, yeah, you should definitely make the leap, but I guess give you a certain degree of certainty in terms of the market and how I think you'd fit into that. And the rest of it is really just working it out yourself.
Sure. Thinking about words of advice, Mark and Golnet, to legal consultants in terms of personal skills, because obviously clients will have selected you for your commercial experience and your legal skills and background, are there things that can you think of that struck you about working as a freelance that one has to take on board? Gona, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I mean, personally, I would say being independent is definitely important. Being able to work by yourself, you get. I mean, it's you. As Mark said, there's the good side of not getting as involved into the organization, which is avoiding the politics and the toxicity sometimes. But the downside is that you don't also get as involved in the human part of it and the team building as well. So you tend to be a bit on the outside looking in, and you have to be comfortable with this. So independence is very important. For a person, some people have a personality that need to be part of a group. They need constant feedback, constant, positive empowerment. This may be a bit challenging. I think as a consultant, you have to be very strong and confident, very comfortable with as Jane said, with change, uncertainty, and a certain level of risk, because it is part of the role. Structured, and I think for me, I've learned a lot about structuring myself, fighting sometimes the fear, sometimes the life that gets in the way, and try and find a way to balance personal and work life, because you're by yourself. You have to give yourself that structure. Look at what is important, what is the me time you need, create it during the day, because you can spend your whole day on a laptop and not even realizing what you've done, and 12 hours later you wake up. So it's important to also check in with yourself, and yes, be very self-aware. Freelancing is perfect, but you also have to give yourself the attention that the corporation is not giving you. You don't have performance reviews anymore. What is it that you want? Where do you see yourself going the next few years? These are questions. I used to laugh saying I organize meetings with myself, but that's exactly what you need to do. You need to be that person for yourself. Why are you doing this? Check in. Are you still happy doing it for these reasons? When you're looking at the next 5 years, how do you see this progress? Because otherwise it's a bit of Groundhog Days. It's just one mission, one assignment after the other. So yes, take that time for yourself. Be very self-aware of your own feelings and how you're progressing in the consultancy career path.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting, this concept of being your own check-in. I think that's valuable lessons to think about. Mark, how about you? Have you got any suggestions? I mean, some people talk about setting up their own, on the practicality side of things, the IT and the workspace and time management. Is that something that you've found you've had to adjust?
No, I'd already sort of set up a sort of even back in 2018, just sort of set up a home office, so I was able to sort of that side of it was catered for, and I was always able to get help very, very quickly if I needed it. Because obviously you have got an IT department, so you have got people doing your IT that you can ring up. In terms of just sort of approaching the whole thing and approaching your sort of first role, obviously you've got to brush up your interview skills, because there may be several people going for a role, and so you can have, in some instances, quite an involved interview process for what is a temporary role, as much scrutiny on you as if you were actually going for a permanent role. So you have got to brush up your interview skills, but that's great, because you've got to go into an organization and you've got to present yourself as being very interested, very personable, very, very easy to deal with, very approachable, all of those things, because you've got to get used to the organization very, very quickly. So you've also got to get yourself into a mindset where you might have got yourself into a comfort zone doing the role that you've done, and then suddenly you've gone to somewhere completely new, and it's, whoa, I'm outside my comfort zone. So you do have to be comfortable moving outside of your comfort zone and getting used to a new organization, new people, new systems, or what their key commercial drivers are. You've got to get used to all that. So you've got to get yourself into that sort of very open frame of mind, in terms of being open and available to everybody, but also just I'm just expanding my mind, because I've got to take all of this in about this different organization, and it's different from what I used to do, and I want to bring skills and advice, but also recognizing that they've got the way of doing things. So just those sorts of skill sets, really, in terms of getting your first role, and going into it, but don't be too anxious about it, because they are aware that you're going into something new, and they've got to give you time to get up to speed.
Thank you. Jane, just thinking about the client side of things, obviously, as I said, they'll require specific legal skills and experience. It does go wider than that. What, in your experience, are clients looking for in terms of other skills?
Yeah, actually, I think Mark and Golden have touched on a lot of those so far, in terms of, starting fast, getting up to speed quickly. I think what makes a difference from what we hear from our clients is how the consultants approach a particular assignment, in terms of being solutions driven rather than a problem identifier, or if you do identify problems, at least come up with the solutions as well. And what Mark said in terms of getting a feel for the culture, that's really important. And hopefully we can help you with that sort of even before the interview stage. But I still think the basics are still really important in terms of being reliable and responsible. Common sense is always useful, taking ownership for what you're there to do, and asking questions when you need to. And I think also what we've seen is, and certainly once you're a freelance lawyer, is having that commitment to learning. We've seen the whole technology space has sort of come in leaps and bounds, and that the legal technology side has grown as well. So being open to learning about new technology in terms of workflow tools or communication tools, each organization will be different in that. So you'll be expected to come up to speed, or at least have some awareness of those before you join. So yeah, I think it's been covered quite nicely.
Great. I'd just add that we do cover in more depth on other Move the Needle webinars about working in-house for sort of commercial awareness preparation, and specifically for interview skills, on our YouTube channel, that you might find helpful if you're moving from private practice in particular. Now, turning to working with Obelisk, as I mentioned, we've got 11 years of working in the sector, and at that time we very much pioneered flexible working, and we always ask clients to consider how flexible options might work for them, and many have come around to our way of thinking and see the benefits of this. We're an award-winning provider of services to in-house teams and private practice, and have 18 areas of commercial practice areas that we offer. And the clients range from FTSE 100 companies, global professional services, and organisations, small startups who basically trust us to help find that great match for them. And that can be short-term cover, boosting a team, or for ad hoc legal advice. We, as I've touched on before, we take the headache out of finding work for you. We don't expect you to bring clients to us, although if you want to, that's great. We promote you to our clients, and leaving you to focus on what you do best. And we are proud, and indeed, Connor, I think you mentioned that most of you joined us because you heard about us. Word of mouth is really the most powerful element of advertising, and most of our consultants join us on the recommendation from colleagues, and choose us because we do put our ethos into practice of promoting and providing these flexible working options. And interestingly, in a recent survey of our consultants, it was highlighted that we do provide them with very good quality assignments. Jane, can I just ask you to outline briefly the practicalities of working with Obelisk? How do people go about that?
What I suggest as a starting point, we've helped lots of people over the years to find out what's right for them. There's a great workbook on our website, or you can get in touch with us and we can put you in that direction. But it's a really useful guide, and there are some good exercises that you can go through to help you ascertain where you are in the process, and whether this is going to be a good step for you. In terms of joining us, there is an onboarding process to go through, but you would be joining us as a consultant, so it's a non-exclusive arrangement. I think with most, which makes sense for me in terms of a freelance arrangement. How you contract with us, that's changed over the last year. So there are a number of different options there that I won't go into those details now, but just being aware of that and how that will impact you from a tax point of view. I guess thinking about your profile and your CV, again, we can support you in getting that into a good space where you are job ready, and thinking about how what you can add value. And I guess, we hope that we can be in your corner from day one and, support. We've got a good central team that will hopefully support you. As Lucinda's reiterated, we can hopefully bring you a flow of opportunities for you to consider. We've got some great clients. At the moment, it's predominantly with in-house legal teams rather than private practice. So we can talk a little bit more about that when we speak. You're covered by our professional indemnity insurance. We've got a streamlined process for invoicing. So it should all be very, hopefully, straightforward. So you can just get on with your work and we can support you on everything else.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to check questions, any Q&As at the moment. Well, one that often is asked, and I know, Jane, you're going like, why? That's a tricky one, but often people ask how much work will they be offered? How do you tend to talk?
Yeah, that's what most people want to know. Do you know what I try and do at that particular time is just run through what, give an overview of what the market looks like at the moment. So, for example, that's sort of the areas where we're seeing demand from our clients, both in secondments and ad hoc and project type workers. Things around commercial regulatory, compliance, technology, employment, anything data related, data privacy, data protection, and then financials, all the sort of wider financial services, so banking and finance, derivatives, funds, corporate M&A. So, I can kind of give a general view to say, look, this is the sort of work that we get, and this is what we've seen in the last 6 months, and sort of put that jigsaw together in terms of how I think I kind of manage their expectations in that regard. But so it's not only that in terms of the likelihood of them getting work, but also, it's going to be a lot about, well, what's their availability and how do they want to work? So there's kind of no simple answer. A lot of the time it's talking through a number of issues and just working out, I guess they can take that away and work out whether it's going to be right for them.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, obviously there's an element that we're dependent on the market situation and what clients are needing, and within the client there'll be their own cycle of sales or contract work or whatever business they're in that drives that. But that's a really helpful perspective to look at that. And we have got a question that people are the question saying, Laura, they're really grateful for the insights that Golnar and Mark have given, and they were wondering whether there's any resources that you, Golnar or Mark, would suggest helping get into the right mindset.
I think for me, when I first started, I was slightly obsessed with all of the stories of people who went for an alternative, career or changed their life, and all of these success stories. So I was actually going through my phone because there was this podcast that I used to love to listen to that is called How Success Happens. And it's they're interviewing people who did that. At some point, they changed their career and they're giving advice. And so many of the things I probably don't remember, but I must have got it from them back then. And they're giving you all of these tools, what they did when they changed their career. So I would say try and surround yourself by this sort of energy, by listening to this sort of podcast or reading these books. So that fear or that is what I'm doing that crazy completely disappears, because you realize that actually many others did the exact same thing, and they none of them regret really.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, anything to add?
I think it's always good for anybody to find ways that they can manage their anxiety, and so it's if you haven't found a way to sort of manage any anxiety you've got in general in life, try and find a way, because it is very helpful, and then just employ that in terms of just sort of helping you to deal with what can feel like a leap into the unknown. but very often you've also got to look at the pattern of your own life and thinking, am I actually being guided and led to this by my experiences? So you almost become quite spiritual in a way, but am I being guided to this by my experiences? Is life nudging me in this direction by making my current situation so awful that it's actually trying to tell me that no, you're actually meant to be doing this? So just take that leap of faith. Go with your instincts. I think if it feels right for you, it probably is.
Yeah, I think that is really helpful to think of that, because there's going to be, pull and push factors, pluses and minuses, without sounding too cliche. But I think it's going into it as clear-headed and with as sort of open mind as possible. I think is probably good advice. Well, thank you. Thank you very much to our panel for your time and your words of wisdom. It's very generous of Golnar and Mark to share their insights about working as legal consultants, and with Obelisk in particular. And to Jane, thank you too. I'd invite our audience, if you'd like to book some time with her to follow up any other questions, take the next steps, you can email her at j.leader, leader, @obelisksupport.com. I mentioned you can find YouTube videos where we've gone into more detail about working as an in-house consultant and how to prepare for interviews. And there are obviously case studies from clients and consultants on our website. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And we do look forward to working with you soon and love to hear from you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.